According to the 1892 book, The Mound Builders, Their Works and Their Relics, Volume 1, by Stephen D. Peet, page 186. We have divided the mound builder territory into different districts. The method of defense varied according to the location. In the northern regions, the wilder and more uncivilized races dwelt. These erected stockades resembling Caesar's forts, built in the forests of Gaul. And the central regions were architecturalists. They lived in walled villages resembling those of medieval times, the fortifications resembling castles. In the southern districts we find the system of pyramids, which resemble those of the ancient people of the East, especially the Assyrian and Chaldean. Most Assyrians were dark-skinned peoples, as were all non-mutated humans on Earth. But there were some Assyrians who had mutations that made them very tall and even gave them white skin. This was the ruling class in Assyria, and they were very intelligent and had mastered war. White skin is a common characteristic among those with fallen angel DNA. As we can see in the book of Noah, when Lamech saw his son being born from his mother's womb, Lamech was extremely scared because Noah came out white. And he said, "This does not look like it could be our son. He looks like he's the seed of an angel from heaven." During the days of Lamech and Noah, the only angels that they seen on earth at the time were the ones that came down to have sex with the women and therefore produced the Nephilim, which apparently, according to this text, also had white skin. It is said that the ruling class of Assyria had fallen angel DNA. In the Mesopotamian Chronicle, called the Dynastic Chronicle, which denotes the dynasty of the Mesopotamian kings, opens up with the following. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Eridu Alulim became king. He ruled for many years. Alaujar ruled for many years. Two kings of the dynasty of Eridu ruled for many years. They were called kings from heaven. As you can see on this clay tablet, it states that some of the earliest kings of Mesopotamia were indeed from heaven, meaning they were indeed the fallen angels, which interbred with the humans there and created an elite race of tall, white Assyrians and Babylonians. Chief rolling thunder of the Comanches is documented of saying, "Innumerable moons ago, a race of white men, 10 feet high, and far more rich and powerful than any white people now living, here inhabited a large range of country extending from the rising to the setting sun. Their fortifications crowned the summits of the mountains, protecting their populous cities situated in the intervening valleys. They excelled every other nation which was flourished, either before or since, with a manner of cunning handicraft. They were brave and warlike, ruling over the land that they had wrested from its ancient possessors with a high and haughty hand. Compared with them, the pale faces of the present day are pygmies in both art and arms. When this race got too proud and forgot mercy, the Great Spirit wiped it out, and all that is left of their society is their mounds, still visible on the tablelands. The chief is clearly describing the mound builders as he even mentioned their mounds. But as you can see, the chief is clearly describing the Assyrian Empire at its height of civilization, similar to what we see past the time of King Sennacherib, whose empire stretched from sea to sea. The true Assyrians were a people whose skin would have been chestnut colored to dark brown. However, consistent with the giant documentations in Europe, Iraq, China, India, and modern Egypt, the giants of old had mutations other than just extreme height. They also tended to be described with red hair, white skin, blue skin, green skin, 6 fingers, 6 toes, elongated heads, multiple rows of teeth, enormous strength, great intellect, wicked, sexually immoral nature, and cannibalistic practice, and sometimes they even had wings. The royal bloodlines of many empires around the ancient world had kings who were said to be taller than life. Every empire who was in power before the Hellenistic period, with the exception of all Hebrew empires, had great giant kings, children of the fallen angels. This is what Job 9 and 24 meant when it says, "The earth is given unto the hand of the wicked." King Cyrus of Persia was literally described as being an extremely tall man, perhaps with 4 wings. His symbol was the bird, and in scripture he is called the ravenous bird from the east. King Xerxes of Persia was 8 feet tall, taller than the rest of those of the entire Persian Empire. King Kasakam of Egypt was described being 5 cubits and 3 palms high, which is equivalent to 8 foot 6 inches tall. The Amorite king Og of Bashan is denoted as being around 13 feet tall, given the description in Deuteronomy 3 and 11. This is more than double the size of a 6-foot man today. The descendants of those kings from heaven of the Assyrian Empire, those giant whites, were said to have been wiped out for their pride, which would have greatly weakened their empire and left only normal-sized black peoples in power. Note that the rulers of Assyria were called prideful in Zechariah 10 and 11 and Isaiah 10 and 12. This is another match for the people being described by the Comanche chief. In this video, I will prove without a shadow of a doubt that the true Assyria is the territory of the North American mound builders. I will be using scripture, artifacts, language, and more pieces of evidence to prove this point. There were only 2 mound-building civilizations on Earth: the North American mound builders and the quote-unquote Assyrians of the Middle East. Now, the mounds of the Middle East include the Mound of Nimrud, the Sultan Tepe Mound, Gurdi Kalarak Mound, Bakr Awa Mound, and the Sharezer Mound. Now, the mounds of the North American mound builders include the Cahokia Mounds, including the Monk's Mound, the Spiro Mounds, Serpent Mound, the Poverty Point Mounds, and thousands more. There are thousands more mounds in the North American continent. than in modern-day Assyria. The North American mounds historically are some of the oldest man-made structures on Earth. Genesis tells us that Assur was one of the first cities built after the flood. Yet, according to archaeologists, the mounds of America predate the mounds of the Middle East. When you look at American mounds, they are uniform, complex, and clearly built using some form of mathematics. They also are aligned with astronomical events such as planetary motion and specific stars. There's clear artistry and high architectural knowledge that was put into the construction of these mounds. However, when you look at the Assyrian mounds, they almost look like natural formations, and they have no artistic technique at all, neither do they align with any astronomical events. As you can see, the Middle Eastern mounds completely lack aesthetic value, unlike the American ones, which are much older. These could have been constructed recently. It would not even be a reach to assume that around the 1830s or 40s, some Europeans went to the land with construction workers and heaped up big piles of dirt and called them mounds just so they can mimic the true Assyria, which is in America. Most of the mounds were constructed on the eastern half of the country, east of the Mississippi River. However, we have evidence that the mysterious mound builders made their way as far west as Oregon. The southern Willamette Valley in Oregon is an ideal area to focus LiDAR's unique architectural capabilities. The region is heavily wooded and is known to contain hundreds of low-lying earthwork features or mounds. Idaho was also known to have a few mounds. Two ancient burial mounds in Franklin County were recorded by James Martineau in 1876 and are a part of a rich Native American history in the Cache Valley. Miss Foster, an elder citizen of Franklin County, Idaho, remembers as a youngster visiting her grandmother's home that overlooks the ancient mounds. The Indians would camp down by the mounds and do ceremonial dances, she said. It was scary. My grandmother told me not to worry. They wouldn't be there long, and they soon left. Ken Cannon, a USU anthropologist who worked on the Bear River Massacre site, said that he heard about burial sites in Franklin County. If they are burial grounds, I would guess they are from the Fremont period, 2,000 to 700 years ago, he said. Idaho does have specific laws that protect burial sites. Now, Franklin County is at the southern border of Idaho and the northern border of Utah. And as we know, this is the area around the territory of Judah, which would match the scripture saying that the Assyrians stretched their territory all the way towards Judah, and at one point even invaded the cities of Judah. The Adena Mounds are the oldest mounds north of the Ohio River. Ironically, it sounds like what the Hebrews called Eden or Eden. The scriptures tell us about two different Edens. There was the well-known Garden of Eden as well as the city of Assyria called Eden. Ezekiel 27 and 23, Haran and Canaan and Eden and the merchants of Sheba, Ashur and Chilamad were thy merchants. When you go to the Hebrew and you look at the word Eden, it's Eden. As we can see, the land of Eden is mentioned with Haran, Canaan, Ashur, and Chilamad, four lands of Assyria, with the exception of the merchants of Sheba. These all traded with Tyre. The Adena culture was located in the area now known as Ohio. Amos chapter 1 verse 5 states that Edom was a part of Aram Damascus, an empire from the land of Padan Aram, a region in Assyria that spread west, possibly due to Assyria's rapid growth. The Aramaic people lived in Assyria, but were actually more related to the Hebrews. Their empire spread west to Gilead, but when they started to oppress the Israelites, Yah condemned them to captivity in the land of Kir. Kir was a place in Assyria that meant fortress or castle. Remember the excerpt from the 1892 book, The Mound Builders, Their Works and Their Relics, Volume 1, by Stephen D. Peet, page 186. It states that the mound builders in the central part of their territory built medieval-looking castles. These castles were later destroyed in the 1800s and were never heard from again. Today, all Hebrews descend from Aramaeans. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were Aramaeans. The original habitation of the land of Aram was Haran, also known as Padan Aram. In Genesis 28:2, Isaac commands Jacob to go to the land of Padan Aram, to his uncle's house. In Genesis 29:1, he makes it there, and Padan Aram is called the land of the people of the east. This land is later called Haran in verse 4. Haran in Hebrew simply means mountain climbers, indicating that the land of Haran had villages in the mountains, which also means the mountains were not too steep and were level enough for habitation. Padan Aram means extended highland or extended plateau. The part of the modern Mesopotamia that is east of modern Israel does not have any mountains at all, and therefore does not match this description. But you know it does match the description perfectly? The Appalachian Mountains. It's literally an extended plateau. And also heaps of stones, the same heaps of stones that Jacob built when he left Padan Aram, can be found all throughout the Appalachians today, which indicates that these heaps of stone were built as a tradition in Padan Aram to solve problems without conflict, basically as a peace treaty. Also, according to Amos chapter 1 verse 5, the plain of Avin was also included as a part of the Aram Damascus Empire. According to Ezekiel 30:17, Avin was originally an Egyptian territory. This means Avin was probably in the Missouri-Illinois region. If Aram and Egypt were a part of the same empire in the Middle East, then the Levant would completely be engulfed, which we can see during the reign of Thutmose III, who supposedly lived during the time of Joshua. However, it would make perfect sense in the American model because all empires touch each other. Genesis chapter 10 verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Ashur, and builded Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah. There was a group of Indians in the eastern coast of North America who literally called themselves the Iraq Indians. The French then called them the Iroquois. Around their territory, we have Lake Erie, all in similar etymology as the city of Erech, also known as Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham dwelt. Then when we look at Akkad, the American Indians of eastern North America also had a territory which they called Akkadi. Now let's look at Calneh. In Hebrew, Calneh is Kana. Kana was also a territory of the Iroquois Indians on the eastern coast of North America, which was called Kanata, which later became known as Canada, the country today. And then when we look at the land of Haran, as we mentioned previously, there was a tribe in the eastern coast of North America called the Huron Indians, And this is where we get the name of the Lake Huron. And they live very close to the Appalachian Mountains. The first 11 of Jacob's sons were born in Haran. Now we read in Genesis 30 and 14 that Reuben went out into the field and found mandrakes. In Hebrew, mandrakes are called dudeh, which translates to love apples, because they look like female ovaries. They are a sweet ground fruit known as May apples. May apples, also known as American mandrakes, are indigenous to eastern North America, around the Appalachian Mountains. This is the same exact location of where Haran would be on an American model. This is no coincidence whatsoever. This is another perfectly fitting puzzle piece. Also in Genesis 30, we see 3 other North American plants mentioned: the poplar tree, the hazelnut tree, and the chestnut tree. Poplars, also known as Leodendron tulipiferia scientifically, is also indigenous to eastern North America, around the Appalachians, in the exact same location as Haran on an American model. Same thing with the hazelnut trees. These are indigenous to North America, Europe, and the Middle East. But among the American hazelnuts, they grow solely in Eastern America, around the Appalachian Mountains, in the same exact location of Haran on an American model. Now it gets very interesting with the chestnut tree, which don't even grow in the Middle East. In fact, to this day, they can only be found in Europe, China, Japan, and of course, Eastern North America, around the Appalachian Mountains, the same exact location as Haran on an American model. More perfectly and strategically fitting puzzle pieces. The biblical description of Assyria is vague, but looking at the description of the rivers that flow from the Garden of Eden will help us. But firstly, where is the Garden of Eden? The truth is, Eden is in a hidden location. Zaphon, or north in Hebrew, also means to be hidden or to conceal. The true Garden of Eden is indeed in the North Pole. Before you say the North Pole is too cold, let it first be known that at the beginning our God set upon the stones of fire, which was a mountain west of the Garden of Eden, but in the center of the earth. And there his glory radiated like fire, thus giving the mountain the name Stones of Fire. His light shone like a second sun. Therefore the Garden of Eden would not have been cold at this time. We can see proof of this in Ezekiel 28 and 14 through 16. All ancient complete world maps that date back before the 17th century depict a continent in the center of the earth with 4 distinct rivers originating from an undescribed mountain in the center of the continent. Several cultures around the world all share a common belief about a holy region in the middle of the earth in the North Pole. The Celtics called it Avalon, the Buddhists called it Jambudvipa, the Hindus called it Shambhala, the Norse called it Argatha, the Greeks called it Hyperborea, and the Hebrews, of course, called this area the Garden of Eden. At one point, all the continents of the earth were connected into one large supercontinent. And it wasn't until the time of Peleg, according to Genesis 10 and 25, when all the continents separated into their modern positions. And as you can see in Genesis chapter 1, it states when Yah created the earth, he gathered all the dry land into one area. And when those continents separated, 3 of the 4 rivers that were mentioned in Genesis 2 actually became the oceans of the earth. The first river is called the Pison. In Hebrew, it means to increase or to grow fat. It is said that this area compassed a land of immense gold and other precious resources. This fits the Pacific Ocean, not only because the Pacific Ocean is the largest body of water on earth today, because the land of Lemuria or Mu, sunk into the sea and became the Pacific Islands. But also because along the western coast of the Americas there is an immense area of gold. From the northern tip of Alaska to the southern tip of Chile is the longest range of gold on the entire planet. The second river is called the Gihon. In Hebrew, it means to burst forth, that is, with strength. It is said that this river compasses the entire land of Ethiopia or Kush. It is important to understand that in ancient times, Ethiopia was not restricted to the modern country of Ethiopia, but back then, Ethiopia was in reference to the entire continent of what is now called Africa. In Joshua chapter 10 and verse 9, it says that the Gihon River became a great sea, also known as Oceanus, and also bordered Western Europe. From the etymology of Gihon, we get the following: Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, Ghana, Guyana, and Guyana all border the South Atlantic Ocean. Because this body of water is said to burst forth with strength, we can infer that when this body of water became an ocean, the ocean's current was also a strong current. This makes sense because some of the Earth's strongest currents can be found in the modern Atlantic Ocean, specifically the Central Atlantic Ocean near the coast of West Africa, as well as the very southern part of the Atlantic Ocean underneath South America and South Africa, with the continent of Atlantis Minor being between Northwest Africa, Western Europe, and Eastern North America. The Gihon River actually was split into two rivers, which then combined again south of Atlantis Minor. Therefore, the area where the northern Atlantic is today, there was at one point two rivers, one being called the Gihon River and the other being called the Hiddekel River. The Hiddekel River is the same river mentioned in the book of Daniel chapter 10 verse 4. This was the river he traveled to, because Daniel lived in Babylon, which is truly Quebec, and the North Atlantic Ocean borders Quebec. In this scripture, the Hiddekel River is called the Great River because at this time the river already became the North Atlantic Ocean and was already merged with the Gihon. The Hiddekel River is supposed to flow towards the east of Assyria according to Genesis 2 and 14. According to Zechariah 10 and 11, Assyria bordered both a sea and a river and shared that river with Egypt. And when that river runs dry, both nations would be affected. In America, that would put Assyria on the east coast of the North American continent between the Atlantic and the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River is the true Euphrates River and the only river of the four great rivers that did not become an ocean, even though there was a tectonic fault directly below it. West of that river was the biblical Egypt or Mizraim. According to Zephaniah 2 and 13, Assyria spread her boundary north of Israel's. With the true Israel being in western North America, that would mean Assyria spread to the Oregon, Idaho, Montana region. Ezekiel 31 and 3 states that the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, of a shadowing shrewd, and of a great stature. Two things can be pointed out from this. The Assyrians traveled to Lebanon, which is north of Israel, and the Assyrians were a very tall people. The first point could explain why we see mounds in Oregon. Southern Oregon and Northern California is the true location of Lebanon. And the second point would explain why the mound builders were so tall. Here's the image of the mound builder height in comparison to the average height today. Now let's look at a prophecy against Ashur or Assyria. Numbers chapter 24 and verse 24. And ships shall come from the coast of Chittim and shall afflict Ashur and shall afflict Eber, and he shall also perish forever. This prophecy came to pass in 1539 when ships from southwestern Europe came to North America, specifically to Florida under Hernando de Soto, when he went into the east coast of the United States and slaughtered many tribes of Indians and enslaved others. The true descendants of Chittim in scripture are the Romans, and the coast of Rome was from Italy to Spain. When Rome conquered the fake Assyria, it was not by ship because the Middle Eastern Assyria was a landlocked nation, not at all surrounded by water. When we look at the cuneiform alphabet, we see one of the letters is a pictograph of a boomerang. Now, most commonly when we think of a boomerang, we think of the Australian Aborigines. However, it should be known that the boomerang actually was used in Australia, modern Egypt, ancient Europe, as well as North America and India. However, there has never been any artifacts of boomerangs found anywhere in the Middle East. Even in Egypt, no boomerang has been found any farther north of Luxor, which is pretty much in southern central Egypt. Again, in the modern Assyria region, no boomerangs have been found belonging to the people of the ancient past. However, located in Florida in southeastern North America, Little Salt Spring is an archaeological site which opens an incredible window on ancient civilizations who supposedly lived on the cusp of the last ice age 10 to 15,000 years ago. A wooden boomerang found by archaeologists in Little Salt Springs in Florida, USA, was broken and discarded by its owner some 9,000 years ago. The portion of an oak throwing stick archaeologists call a non-returning boomerang is at least 9,000 years old and is similar to the weapons found in Australia, ancient Egypt, and Western Europe. The boomerang has also been used by the Hopi people of Arizona and several indigenous tribes of California. It is very well possible that the boomerang originated not in Australia, but in North America, specifically southeastern North America. Now let's deal with something called gematria. Many people are not familiar with gematria and how it truly works. Gematria is not a government thing, it's more so just unveiling the codes of which everything is made out of. See, when the Creator created the universe, He used mathematics. Everything that we see is mathematics. It is known that He used vibrations from His voice to create every single thing in existence. But vibrations have to be tuned to a specific frequency to have any specific effect. Therefore, every single thing in the universe is laden with a specific mathematic value. This means that the Creator Himself created gematria, and numbers do not lie, but people do. Everything in the universe is coded with a specific number, and these numbers will often match numbers with things that are associated with that number. When we go and plug certain names into gematria, when we type in Oregon Mounds, we get the value of 160 and 61. Pay attention to the sixes and the ones. When we plug in Assyrian, we get 106. When we plug in Adena, we get 16. When we plug in the Assyrians, we get 166. And when we plug in Serpent Mound, we get 160 and 61. Now, as you can see on the screen, there's a lot more matches. However, I only read what is circled in the purple. In 1963, in Georgia, near the Chattahoochee River, a woman by the name of Miss Jo Hearn was digging in her garden bed when she struck something hard. It was a clay tablet with writing on it. It was written in the Sumerian language and dated to approximately 2040 BC. According to the book Weird Georgia by Mark Schwerman and Mark Morin, the tablet discovered by Hearn was a receipt that recorded a purchase of several sheep and goats for a ceremonial sacrifice. Now remember, this tablet was discovered in Georgia, a part of the original Assyrian territory. Much previously, in 1877, the United States invaded the Montana-Idaho regions, making war with the Nez Perce Indians. The war was intense and led to the surrender of the Nez Perce troops. Chief Joseph, the commander of the army, gave to the U.S. troops a peace offering so that their people would not be wiped out. The peace offering included a family pendant that was passed down to him by his forefathers. The pendant was a cuneiform tablet, a receipt for sheep purchased by a man named Nalu as he prepared to sacrifice them to the fertility goddess of Assyria. Chief Joseph was not fully of Assyrian bloodline because most of his ancestors come from Siberia, but it is plausible that his Siberian ancestors mingled with the Assyrian mound builders who were already there, and this pendant was passed down to him, which is why he said clearly that he got this artifact from his white ancestors, which again, the Comanche chief said that this empire, which stretched from sea to sea, had rulers who were tall white people. Now we see that those tall white people also spoke an Assyrian language. Doesn't that mean that those tall white people were the ruling class of the Assyrians? Chief Joseph himself also wore a bag which had the symbol of the Assyrian sun god, most likely was passed down as well by his ancestors. When we see this flag, which is the modern flag of Assyria, it has the same symbol on it. Near the Shawnee Creek of Oklahoma, there was also discovered a tablet that depicted the symbol of the Assyrian fertility goddess. This particular symbol is an illuminated sun with a crescent moon below it and with various cuneiform letters beneath that. Because Oklahoma was one of those territories where Mizraim and Aram touched each other, and the Aramaeans worshiped the same gods and goddesses as Assyria, it is no surprise that this artifact was found here. Near Quaker City, Ohio, an amateur Indian arrowhead collector discovered a cuneiform tablet in 1978. Its ancient provenance was established by David Owen, professor of Near Eastern Studies at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. He translated the Sumerian text, which had been composed by a man named Uri in the month of Dumazi, which is late June, in the year the Ensi, or the ruler of Karzida, was elevated. Now pay attention. The author of this tablet's name was Uri. Just like I stated previously, Uri is indeed an ancient Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian word. And we just so happen to have one of the Great Lakes in North America having the same exact name. Karzida was the second city of worship for the same moon god, likewise referenced by the inscription on Chief Joseph's tablet, suggesting a relationship between his family heirloom and the Quaker City find, which came to light years after his death. In the book Lost Colonies of Ancient America, a comprehensive guide to pre-Columbian visitors who really discovered America, anywhere between page 36 to 39, depending on what copy of the book you have, it states, many such the third tablets have been found in the U.S., states Professor Owen, including some tablets dug up a few years ago from the ruins of an old apartment house in Auburn, New York. So many tablets spread over half the continent, from Montana to Georgia, Ohio, and New York. So according to this professor, there's been many tablets spread around the United States, many of which are not online, many of which there's no documentation of it, but he says from Georgia to Ohio to Montana to New York. There's many more tablets that they found that I am not mentioning in this video simply because not everything is online. All of the tablets that we see on display in museums from around the world that tell you that these tablets are Assyrian, Babylonian, Sumerian in origin are truly from America. Hundreds of Michigan residents from around the 1830s till the 1920s found odd relics when digging on their property. Any media source on the Michigan relics will tell you that they are all fakes. Sure, maybe some are fakes, but they are 7,000 artifacts found by hundreds of people who never met each other, so at least some of them have to be authentic, logically speaking. Understand that the earliest of these artifacts were discovered as early as the 1830s, and the tablets that they tell us are from the Middle East were also discovered in the late 1830s and after, none before, which is very coincidental that at the same time the Michigan relics were discovered, the Middle Eastern cuneiform tablets were also discovered. When we look at this excerpt from the book Discovering the Mysteries of Ancient America, page 29, it states, when the last of the Michigan mounds were excavated around 1920, approximately 7,000 mystery tablets have been removed, some under controlled conditions. What is controlled conditions? Classified conditions. And attested by eyewitness swearing affidavits. Although the sheer magnitude of this statewide discovery made by literally hundreds of persons, most of them unknown to each other, argue convincingly on the behalf of its prehistoric authenticity. The mostly terracotta or baked clay artifacts were universally condemned as fakes by the Victorian scientists, but their ill-considered verdict may have concealed the truth about the Michigan tablets, namely that they were religious documents and teaching aids. But the truth of the Michigan tablets is that they were the remains of the Assyrian artifacts, as well as even some Egyptian artifacts, as the Assyrians and the Egyptians dealt with each other. And the ones that you see when you Google Michigan relics, for the most part, are indeed fakes. But then there are some that are real and are authentic. And there are some that are so important as they had to be reclassified of being from Middle Eastern origin. It is impossible for around the same exact time for 7,000 artifacts to just be faked by hundreds of different people who did not even know each other. One particular fact about the Michigan relics is that anywhere between 7,000 to 9,000 total relics have been found, but only 250 at most are shown to the public. Think about that. Where are the rest? Clearly, the ones that we see on Google are completely fake. 100%. They look like a non-artistic third grader drew them. They even have depictions of Christianity on it. Clearly, we know this stuff is fake just to make the entire idea of the Michigan relics look fake. But there have been thousands of real Michigan relics. But for the most part, we don't see them on Google. You know why? Because during the same time the Michigan relics were found, guess what else was found? The Babylonian tablets, the Assyrian tablets, the Epic of Gilgamesh, so on and so forth, all throughout the Middle East apparently. Strange, right? And this is just from the state of Michigan alone. The mounds of Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, etc. all contained numerous artifacts and tablets that were excavated and hidden away by the Smithsonian or transported across the sea. In 1965, a copper medallion was discovered in Richfield, Utah. It is inscribed with cuneiform writing and appears to depict the Assyrian fertility goddess. The medallion also appears to display some Egyptian characteristics. This version is enhanced so the cuneiform writing is visible. In the 1920s, a famous Arizona sheriff who was featured on many Wild Western movies, named Wyatt Earp, found this Assyrian clay tablet near the Grand Canyon. Instead of reporting this artifact to the authorities, he decided to simply give it to a close friend, who then passed it down to his grandchildren. It was never known to the public until the family opened up about the tablet on YouTube. If Wyatt Earp were to have given this tablet to the Smithsonian, who would have simply dismissed it as being fake, but then at the same time would have sold it to the British Museum, and it would have been labeled as Mesopotamian from the Middle East. Now, why would a tablet with cuneiform Assyrian writing be found near the Grand Canyon? Simply because we know that according to scripture, when the Assyrians spread westward, they conquered the land of Egypt and Ethiopia. The specific part of Ethiopia that they conquered was Havilah. Havilah is a tribe of Cush that dwelt near Mizraim in what is now today California. So at one point, the Assyrians were indeed in the southern California, Arizona region, near the Grand Canyon. Isaiah 20:4 states, "So shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners, and the Ethiopians captive, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Mizraim." This tablet may have simply been dropped on the ground while the Assyrians captured Egypt. After all, this tablet wasn't that important to Assyria, as it was simply a receipt. So it's clear and very evident that there was Assyrian artifacts in Georgia near the Chattahoochee River, in Montana under the possession of Chief Joseph, in Richfield, Utah, and in Arizona near the Grand Canyon. But the question is, how did these Assyrian artifacts get to North America? Let's just play devil's advocate here and pretend that the true Assyria is indeed in the Middle East. Well, if the true Assyria is indeed in the Middle East, it would be impossible for them to make their way to the United States. And why do I say that? Well, when we look at what is presented to us as Assyrian art, we will clearly see that the Assyrians did not have the knowledge of the sail. All of their boats were designed for a river. They only knew how to paddle. They did not know how to adjust a sail or to create a sail in general. Their technology was not suited for sea travel, only river navigation. And if this is the case, if they were to take any riverboat of their magnitude into the sea, it would be destroyed very quickly upon entering the Indian Ocean. Also, there would be little to no reason at all why the Assyrians would want to come all the way to the Americas. In ancient times, anytime a nation wanted to explore, it wasn't just for the sake of exploration, it was more so for trade. There would be no point for the Assyrians to trade with the Americas if they lived in the Middle East, because they could easily trade with all of East Africa, all of India, all of Iran, as well as all of Indonesia at most. They would not need to go all the way to the Americas. It's far too risky and definitely outweighs the reward. If you like to build your ruach or your spirit, you must like to build your health as well. Check out our website, JNR Eating Herbs, for all your holistic needs. We have over 100 quality products that include supplements, teas, soaps, incenses, tonics, and more at very affordable prices. Click our link in the description to heal yourself today. By supporting my channel through patreon.com, you are aiding in the progress and production of these videos. You are also helping me raise the funds to launch official archaeological excavations throughout North America to uncover more true Hebrew artifacts and remains in this land. You will also see exclusive content that you will find nowhere else.